welcome back to Days of Darkness and welcome to my review of Blair Witch. This one came out in 2016. It is starring Callie Hernandez, James Allen McCune, and was directed by Adam Wingard. So, this is the end of the Blair Witch story as we know it. I'm sure they will eventually make another one. That's just what Hollywood does with movies like this. You have to retain the licenses and things of that nature, so I'm sure eventually we'll get another one. It's just how series like these work. But for right now, this is the end of the road. And I gotta say, man, overall, I'm watching these back to back. It was one thing that stood out to me is just how different all three of these films are. Like, typically, when you watch a series of movies, and this isn't always the case, especially as time goes on with certain series, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, etc., etc. But they all retain a certain type of feeling. You know, there's always a very similar tone with most. Except like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is just all fucking over the place. But with Blair Witch, there's only 3 entries in this, as far as movies are concerned. I know they did like a video game and stuff like that. But man, overall, each one of these movies are drastically different than the other. And even this one, which is a direct sequel, story-wise, to the original Blair Witch Project, which we'll get into all that. But obviously, the first Blair Witch Project is just a fucking masterpiece, in my opinion. I understand people not really being too fond of the movie for their own particular reasons, but to me, man, holy fuck. Like, it's legitimately one of my favorite horror films ever. And then you get to Book of Shadows, which, if you've seen my Book of Shadows review, I admire that they took a risk and they did something different, but it did not pay off in the end. And then you get to this one. One thing I credited Blair Witch, Book of Shadows, whatever, Blair Witch 2. One thing I credited them for was taking a risk and doing something different, not playing it so safe. A lot of studios, a lot of Hollywood execs would much rather you just put more kids in the woods with a camera. And that's what they did here with Blair Witch 2016. This is the story of James, Heather Donahue's brother, who obviously was alive during the events of 1994. He was a very small child, and obviously he wasn't there. But he heard about what happened, and his sister's been missing for 20 years. And so this story picks up with him joining with his friends to do a documentary about him basically trying to find closure. And all this really heats up when he finds that, you know, there's a possibility that she could be alive somehow after he discovers a tape that he found from this dude online, yada, yada, yada. That is one thing. It's like he kind of has this hope in the back of his head that, okay, maybe she's alive. Nah, dude. 20 years out in those woods, and I imagine he's seen the footage. Like, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I don't think they really ever go over it. But, come on. 20 years. You know, I'm not... Hey, humans are capable of crazy things, but... especially how that footage ended. Nah, son. But anyways, I think the reasons for this movie taking place, story-wise, it's all valid. You know, if you're a family member and your sister is just up and gone one day, you would want closure to that. You would want, I mean, it's pretty obvious that she's dead, but you would want some kind of reason, you know? So I really like what they did with that. As far as playing it safe, and usually I don't prefer that. I always like, look, you can, it's different with each series, you know. Friday the 13th, it's a pretty formulaic thing, and I dig a lot of those movies. The first 6 especially, I really dig those movies. And it's when they started going outside of the box that I was like, ugh. So it just depends. They played it safe here, and I think for the most part, it pays off. I think what we have here is a solid movie. I watched it once in 2016. Didn't come back to it because I didn't really see a reason to. I liked the movie. I didn't hate the movie, but it's nothing that I was in a rush to just go watch again. That being said, I kind of ended this movie and I was just like, okay, you know. Book of Shadows was a very different reaction. I was just like, oh my fucking god, you know. And with this one though, it was just kind of like, all right, cool, like, good movie, solid, you know. I'm not offended by anything, you know. I'm not the most easily offended guy in general, but you get what I'm saying. I was just kind of very, you know, this movie did its job, you know, which you can look at that and you can take that as a positive and a negative. You know, it's good that they didn't do anything offensively bad that, like, just insulted fans and stuff like that. But at the same time, I was just wanting something a little more from this. And I think a big part of that is from the fact that this movie feels something about that original Blair Witch. One of the most appealing things about it is it feels fucking real. Like, the performances in that movie, the way it was shot, all of that, it feels genuine, and it feels like you're really watching the last days of these 3 college kids' lives, and it's fucking terrifying, you know? Whereas in this one, it does a good job as a horror film, but with Blair Witch, I really want to have that feel of authenticity, and I just didn't get that here. There was something missing, you know, how that original movie was shot, and just leaving those kids out there in the woods, and, you know, obviously feeding them to a certain extent, and, you know, taking care of them, but still putting them out there in those elements. And it's very clear that that did not happen here. I'm not saying I want that to happen, because I'm sure that was not the best time in that original film. But yeah, man, there was something off about this. It felt very glossy. It felt very produced. And I know, you know, you can't really replicate that whole phenomenon of, oh, is it real, is it not? And I don't expect that. But I do think there was something lacking as far as the filmmaking is concerned, and found footage horror is tricky. You know, I've seen a lot of found footage horror that doesn't, like, there is something to be said for found footage horror films that just, they catch everything. Like, it, in a certain way, I don't want a found footage horror film where you're supposed to believe that these people are in a real life or death situation, and, you know, disregarding the whole criticism of, oh, why are they filming? You know, which a lot of found footage horror films just don't address. And this one does a okay job at addressing, but it's not as strong as the original. We just have a main character here played by Callie Hernandez, who, much like Heather Donahue, is really committed to making this documentary work, and it's a student film, yada yada yada. But when it's life or death and you're panicking and shit is really hitting the fan, you're not gonna get every single shot of everything you want to see. It's just not how a human would operate. If you're filming it, fine, but you're not gonna catch everything. And it just, even in the most terrifying moments of this movie, it all feels very cinematic and very polished. And sure, it's a good looking movie. I'm not gonna say it's not, but, you know, that's another thing about that original, man, where they didn't catch everything, you know? And it's, again, it kind of lends itself to the authenticity of that movie. Another thing that didn't really work for me as far as the filmmaking is concerned is the amount of cameras that are in this movie. So, in the original, they have 2 cameras, so you can kind of switch between them, and, you know, it's not overkill. In this one, and I know a lot of people are gonna say, like, oh, you're comparing it too much to the original. Like, yeah, dude, it's a fucking sequel to the original. Of course I'm gonna compare it to the original. Why wouldn't I? But moving on. In this one, they are all armed with these little, I guess they're not GoPros, but they're like, obviously they're just kind of mobile cameras. I think they put them on their ear. And hey, you know, you're making a documentary, and obviously the intention is to edit this later on. But the amount of cuts in this movie at certain points is jarring. And you're just going from character to character to character to character to character, and it's like, dude, like, fuck, man. One thing I really like about that original movie is it holds on shit, and it holds on certain shots when they are competently filming things. And in this one, it's just cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. It's like, dude, just chill the fuck out. If they would have kept it to that 2-camera formula, and, you know, you can even have your stupid little ear GoPro things. Like, I'm fine with that, whatever. But it's just, there's like 7 or 8 cameras in this at certain points, and they're just cutting between. It's like, dude, it's getting fucking jarring. It's kind of hard to keep track of which character is doing what, and it's just, for me, that it was, I'll chop that up to an annoying part of this movie. It is just the constant, and obviously, we'll talk about the last act here, but once the last act kicks in, obviously a lot of people are dead by this point. So you're not cutting as much, and it's just the 1 or 2 cameras. Back to the original concept. And the movie gets much better. We'll just talk about it right now. I love the last act of this movie. I really like it. I think the whole idea of, you know, getting back to that house, and the fact, I'll say this, when they stumble across that footage of the dude running around in the house, and you see this, like, this shot of, like, what James thinks is Heather, and that's kind of lends him to think that, oh, maybe she's alive still, which, like I said, but but that kind of gets that, like, hope in the back of his mind of, oh, maybe she's alive. I don't know how they would have recorded that, or how they would have, I don't get it. Obviously, like, it's pretty clear that it was staged by these 2 wackos that just live out in Blair, or Burkittsville, whatever. But it's still, it was very, I don't know. There was something about it that I don't understand why they had that footage. But anyways, but they get to that house at the end of this movie, and now it's just James and, I want to say her name is Lisa. I'll go with that. But Callie Hernandez's character. And the ending of the last act of this film, I think, is fucking tremendous. The suspense is just chopped up to a large degree. And I think, especially when there's, like, scenes of Callie. I'm just going to call her Callie because I can't remember her fucking name in the movie, but her character just shuffling through those through the little tunnels under the fucking house, and she gets stuck in one of them, and it's all fucking muddy and gross and disgusting. It's like, oh my god. And it's fucking scary, man, because you start hearing these growls and shit behind her, and I don't know, like, this movie just does really well when it has that 1 camera just running throughout that house. It reminds me a lot of that original movie, and I think having more of this movie, you know, stick to that same sort of filmmaking style, I think would have really lent itself to the previous 2 acts, not only just, you know, the third. I will say one thing as far as the last act that didn't work for me is seeing the Blair Witch. Now, something about, and, you know, again, I'm going to bring up the original movie, and people are going to fucking complain, whatever. Something about that original movie, one of the creepiest things is you don't see the Blair Witch. It's that Jaws effect, man. It's like you don't show the killer so fucking much. You leave it up to the imagination. You never see the Blair Witch once in that movie, but the presence is still so high. and so hardcore there. Like, it's fucking nuts. Excuse me. White Castle, man, you gotta love it. But no, man, and in this one, they hold back for a lot of it, but there's one shot where you kind of see something, and I'm like, okay. And then in the final act, as great as it is and as suspenseful as it is, you blatantly see the Blair Witch. It's not like she holds on it and you don't get an extended shot of it or anything like that, but it's there in two very distinct shots. You can see it, and one of the characters talks about how when I can't remember her actual name, but when the woman who would become the Blair Witch was killed, I think her name was Ellie. When Ellie, we'll say that, was killed, she was strung up to a tree, and they tied rocks to her limbs, so her arms and her legs, these big boulders, so she was like stretched out as she died. And so this creature now resembles that, and it has those extended limbs, which I thought was a really cool touch. I don't like seeing the Blair Witch, but I thought the design was fine. It is what it is. I think when you hype up a movie monster so much and no one ever sees that monster forever, and then you get it and it's like, okay. Like, I don't, and maybe that's just my expectations being too high, but I would have wanted something a little more. I don't know, but that's just me. Overall, though, the ending of the movie, we get James and Lisa in the, I don't remember her name, I'm sorry. But we get those two in the house. She ends up running back into James, and they introduce this element of the Blair Witch that you can't look directly at her. It's kind of like a Medusa thing. You can't look directly at her, or else she'll just straight up fucking kill you. Which, I don't know how I feel about that, because it's very clear that at some point in that original movie, Heather absolutely saw the Blair Witch and just didn't immediately die like the characters in this one does. But we do get I'm pretty sure we get a little voice cue from Heather Donahue, and he looks back. James looks back. They're standing in the corner. They're doing the whole Burkittsville 7 thing. They're standing in the corner, and they're like, just don't look at it. Just don't look at it. And then stupidly, he just ends up looking at it, and you get it. So James gets killed, and I did like the idea of her kind of looking through the camera lens and like not actually looking at the Blair Witch. I thought that was a fine idea, and you see her face through the final couple seconds of the film. See the, Callie Hernandez's face just kind of walking throughout the house as all this crazy noise is happening and she's getting all scared. And it ends with the Blair Witch impersonating James's voice, and she inevitably looks behind her and sees the Blair Witch and gets killed. Which is how the movie ends. I like that they kind of replicated the ending of the original and just had this completely bleak ending. That's one of those things where it's like, I don't see a character getting out of that situation in any other way but dying, So it would have been real weird if she just somehow made it out of the forest. And I think it adds to the terror more. Is like once you're in those woods and that curse is on you, you're just fucked. There's no getting out of it. You are just fucked. And yeah, man, I hopped around a lot. Obviously, this isn't a retelling of the story. If you want to watch the movie, go watch the movie. But overall, solid film. Wasn't anything too rough. And yeah, man, I enjoyed it for what it was. But that'll do it for the review section of the video. But you know what we gotta do now, baby. For the first time in the Blair Witch review series, we are going to be talking about the blood, the guts, and the gory bits. We're going to talk about my kill of the film. Stick around. Much like the previous two entries into the Blair Witch franchise, Blair Witch 2016 does a lot to set itself apart from the other two. Like I said, I kind of came out of this movie just, alright. But one thing that really impressed me was the fact that they upped the graphic nature of what the Blair Witch can do, which I really enjoyed. It's not like we see the Blair Witch tearing people in half or ripping people's heads off or anything like that. We don't get any of that. But there's some pretty rough shit in this movie, man. One of the weirdo internet guys that James got in contact with to start this whole journey in the first place, he ends up going nuts and tries to basically kill Lisa at the end of the movie. He gets a knife to the neck from Lisa. That was fucking brutal. Simple kill, nothing really flashy. But it was a solid kill. Loved, I believe his name was... I can't remember his name, but the other boyfriend character. His death is very prolonged, and he's just kind of running throughout the woods and essentially terrified out of his fucking mind, and is just wants to get out of this situation, and he ends up getting killed by the Blair Witch. And I like the fact that he falls down, very clearly injures himself somehow, and the Blair Witch is just kind of, you hear those big footsteps, and this guy's just like fucking having a full-on panic attack, and why wouldn't you? But then eventually he does get killed by the Blair Witch off screen. We just get a little generic like, the fucking camera cuts. Solid kill there. And really there's nothing else stand out as far as kills are concerned. I will give credit to Ashley falling out of the fucking tree. Climbing up the tree to go get the drone. And I think the Blair Witch basically pushes her out of the tree, and she just falls from an enormous height down to her death. That was pretty cool. But speaking of Ashley, the standout thing about that character is the fact that, early on in the film, she gets a wound on her foot. And this is easily, besides my kill of the film, this is my favorite as far as the blood and the guts are concerned. Because as the curse becomes worse, potent, I didn't even know it. As the curse becomes worse throughout the film, you get these small hints at the infection is growing naturally, but in an unnatural way. And essentially what happens to her is branches, and it's like a tree is starting to grow inside this woman's leg. It's so fucking gross. She starts pulling roots out of it and shit, and it's just so fucking disgusting. One of my favorite, if that was a kill, it's not technically a kill, but if that was a kill, that'd probably be my kill of the film. That shit was fucking gnarly, and just the progression of it. Really cool stuff, really cool effect work as well. But I'm going to give my kill of the film to the stick figure kill. And what happens is all these characters are arguing, and they're fighting, and they're just not too happy with one another. And what ends up happening is Ashley ends up grabbing one of the stick figures that was hung up by the Blair Witch around their campsite, much like the original. And she just breaks it. And when she breaks it, the other internet person that they hooked up with to go on this adventure just completely gets just snapped in half. Her fucking body just bends back at the waist, and she just gets obliterated. So fucking out of nowhere. Adds a lot to the lore of the Blair Witch, of the fact that these stick figures are basically like voodoo dolls, and they, she fucking breaks this thing in half, and subsequently the woman gets just completely snapped in two. Just absolutely fucking disgusting. And she's still alive, like, as it happens. Like, she doesn't immediately die. Oh, fucking just brutal shit. I really got a kick out of it, man. And that is going to be my kill of a film. Guys, thank you so much for stopping by and listening to me talk about the Blair Witch movies and listening to me talk about horror in general. I always really appreciate the support. And yeah, man, without further ado, thank you guys so much for stopping by. Thank you for supporting the dream. And yeah, man. Now I'm going to ask you to take care of one another and keep watching horror. Alright, guys. Have a good day. Oh, and also, real quick, before I go, this series is too short to really do a series ranking and to have it warrant its own video, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it right here. From worst to best, it's going to be, Book of Shadows, this one, and then the Blair Witch Project. So, yeah, there's your ranking video. Bye!